It is Xennial Gamer back with part 4 of the Summoner's War Optimizer series. Guys, today is probably the most important video of the series. It's the reason we all use SWOP, how to build a monster in the program. Today's entire video is going to be spent on the builds tab. Part 5 is going to be talking about damage calculation. So one way to think about it is today we're going to be talking about finding your basic build. Part 5 is going to be how to find your advanced build. Now, before I jump into the video, just one quick note. SWOP Connect, which is kind of like the next generation above SWOP Pro, was released about a week ago. It was released after I had already recorded the first 3 parts of this series, so this is the first time I'm mentioning it. So basically what that means is there are 3 versions of SWOP. There is a free version, SWOP Pro, $15, and it's about 100 times faster than the free version. Now, it's not just a matter of the speed. Because it's so much faster, it means that you can run a wider variety of builds. SWOP Connect is a web-based program, which means it does work on Macs, and it is about 4 to 5 times faster than SWOP Pro, making it 400 to 500 times faster than SWOP Free. It's 15 euros. This entire video series is completely the same for SWOP Pro, SWOP, and SWOP Free, SWOP Connect. All 3 of them have the same interface, they work the same way, they have all the same features and functionality. The only difference is that the free version is a little bit slower. But whichever version you're using, you'll be able to do everything I explained to you in this video. Every monster build starts with picking a monster, and right here it says pick a monster, so we can actually scroll down the list, or we can type in. So I'm going to pick a monster, a really generic monster like Fyro. Yes, I 6-starred Fyro. It's my moment of shame in Summoner's War. But we are going to start with Fyro. Now, right below that, you can see I can say Autofill current sets and stats. And what this would do is load all of the different options in the optimizer to be looking for exactly what he's using. And since my Fyro is unruned, that would leave him with nothing. In this case, Lisa. You can see my Lisa is unruned, so it left her with nothing. It just cleared all my fields. Now, once you've picked your monster, I would come over here to set 1, I would put in Violent. I come over here to set 2, and I put in Will. Maybe I want to do Lisa in Violent, but I don't care what the offset is, then I could actually just put in Violent. If I wanted her in Shield, Will, and Revenge, you know, same thing. You can do up to 3 different sets, or you can only do 1 set. You can also do no sets, but I will tell you that even in SWOP Pro, if you run it with no sets, the number of builds, well, it depends on how big your account is. For an account my size with a couple thousand runes, if you try and run it with no sets, it'll take an incredibly long time to run all the builds. So I do recommend having at least 1 set in here, even if it's just a 2 set, so you could run it with just Will, for example. Next up, you want to pick your slot 2, 4, 6. Now, in the older versions of Summoner's War, not SWOP, but Summoner's War, basically before artifacts, you would be able to make your monster builds much more specific. So we might know in advance that we wanted Lisa to be speed, HP, HP. But these days, with artifacts being able to change how many base stats you have, like, you know, if you can use 2 HP artifacts and get an extra 3k HP, or 2 defense artifacts or whatever. For crit damage, you get all sorts of crit damage sub-properties, accuracy, etc. It's made builds much more fluid. So in this case, maybe I want to go with speed, HP, defense, crit rate, HP, defense. Maybe any of these runes are okay for me as long as I hit my target stats. And those target stats you set up down here, which is actually the next step that I use in this process. So actually, let's use Sath as an example instead of the Lisa, because Sath is like a real-world build. So we know, and for Sath, of course, we're building the dot team. So we know that for Sath, we want him on double Will. We don't care what the other set is. We really don't care at all what slots 2, 4, and 6 he's in, so we could actually leave these blank and just let it run every single possible build. But for the sake of getting used to the optimizer, let's just say that we want him on speed, defense, and accuracy. So let's say any of these options are fine. Now, we want to exclude Nemesis. Why do we want to exclude Nemesis? Because Sath is a dungeon monster who is speed tuned. And if he gets hit and the Nemesis procs, it puts him out of turn order. So you never really want Nemesis runes on your dungeon monster. Now below that, we also have the ability to exclude grinded stats. I honestly have to tell you guys, I've never used this function. I'm not sure what the purpose is, so maybe somebody in comments can drop in why you would use it. Now next to that, we have use grinds. This is basically saying, do we want to use the grinds that are in our inventory? So for example, if you have some if you have some will grinds in your inventory and they're blue, then it will estimate what's going to happen if you use those blue grinds. The next thing you can do is tell it, do you want to use the grinds with a min roll or a max roll? You can't unfortunately set a specific roll, you can only set it to min or max. So it's going to take the highest grind that you have, and then it's going to use either a min or a max roll if you turn this option on. One thing to note, when you run it with grinds, you give it significantly more builds. Everything's exponential. So if you're running on the free version and the builds that you're trying to run are taking too long, one way to speed it up is to turn off the use grinds. What I would recommend then is actually just going through and grinding the runes in your inventory, getting a new JSON, reloading it, and that should help speed things up. Now, you also have the option to include immemorial grindstones in there. And the last one is kind of a cool one. This is simulate fully grinded runes. So what this does is it takes every single rune and it assumes that you have legend grinds. You don't actually have to have them, it's just pretending you do. And it applies those legend grinds based on whether or not you hit min or max. So a min roll on a legend grind is 5 attack, or 5 HP, or 5 defense, etc., or 4 speed. So it's going to take all your runes, and any rune that is not grinded, it's going to pretend you added 5 of each of the percentage stats and 4 speed. And for any rune that already is grinded, if it's grinded below 5, it brings it up to that 5 or up to that 4 speed. Again, if you simulate fully grinded runes, it's going to make the builds take much longer. It's all exponential. But what I am actually doing is trying to give you some guidance also if you're on the free version as to how to get more builds out of it. So for example, on the free version, if you turn these two options off, it would allow you then to try and run for a broader build of runes by not estimating the grinds. We can put this leader skill at 28%. We can put the totem to whatever level your tower is, so mine is max. So when I put these two together and I run the build, it will now show me his speed. And the builds are actually going to come up down here. So if you see the speeds right here in green, this shows me what his combat speed is, which is his speed after speed, lead, and tower. If I were to just have no leader skill and only my speed tower, then you'll see these numbers are coming up lower. Now the reason you might use that usually has to do with building dungeon teams when you're looking for certain stats off your dungeon teams, and you want to tweak monsters with different base speeds because your speed tower is actually going to add more speed to monsters with higher base speeds. This is mostly an advanced build that I would recommend you don't really dig into until you get later on in the series. Now, you guys will notice right down here there's actually this little more button. So the last few options we have, we can choose to search for broken sets or no broken sets. Once again, the more runes you have and the fewer sets you've identified up here, the longer it takes to run a build with broken sets. Generally speaking, I always advise against using broken sets anyway because they snowball. Like if you put a broken set on a monster, you're usually doing it because you're trying to make that monster better, which means you're taking the best runes away from 2 other sets. And now the next monster you build, you're not going to be able to make a set from either of the sets you just broke because you already took your best rune, and it has a snowball effect. I only run broken sets on monsters where it matters for speed, like attack bar boosters, or if I have a really random and kind of useless rune like Rage slot 4 HP with tons of speed. Yeah, I'll run that as a broken set somewhere. Now below that, we have the ability to factor in some fight, enhance, the ally rune sets. One important thing to note about this, if you're trying to run, for example, let's say we run Sath in Double Will Fight. If I'm running Sath with a fight set, the optimizer is already assuming the 8% bonus for the fight set that is on Sath. These options down here for the ally sets, these are intended only if other monsters in the team are using them. So a really good example here would be BJR5. When you're running your Belager, he's going to be benefiting from the 12 different fight sets that are on the other monsters on that team, so you could actually utilize fight sets right here. Now, the last option down here, the last checkbox I should say down here, fill missing rune slots. I'm going to be honest, I've never used it, I don't know what it is, and I'll probably be pinning a comment to this video down the road with a couple of things that I didn't know what they did. Now, the last thing in the set field, it's actually a very complicated thing, but it's a very useful thing, which is presets. So if you click this little settings cog right here, it's going to bring up a whole other window which allows you to create presets for any of your monsters. Let's pick a monster, actually let's go with our Sath. We're going to stay with our Sath. So let's say that you know someday in the future you're going to want to build Sath again. So we're going to come down here and we're going to put in our double will, and then for whatever reason we said we're going to put fight on him, and we're going to exclude Nemesis. If we also wanted to exclude shield, we could. And of course, because we have a third set, we didn't actually need to exclude, so this is all just for demonstrative purposes. Maybe I want him to always have a minimum of 25,000 HP. Maybe he needs to have between 153 and 161 speed for speed tuning purposes. And then from that, I'm actually just going to click save. And now my Sath preset is saved, so if I close this window and then I load out my Sath again, boom, you see the entire thing, all the fields have filled out for me. Now, over here you'll also notice we have the ability to autofill current sets and stats. To load my Ganymede, who does not have a preset, but I set it to autofill, then it would load Violent Destroy, Speed, Attack, Accuracy. That's right, my Gany is on Violent Destroy. This is not my RTA build. Anyway, so you can just have it autofill your current sets as well, and although a lot of times you might be looking to upgrade, it's a good starting point. And speaking of good starting points, today is a good starting point to start saving money on every pack you buy in Summoner's War. So today's video is sponsored by Huawei App Gallery, whom I have partnered with through the entire month of June to bring you additional savings over what you would normally get. Guys, you know I'm not free to play, right? I mean, I'm very not free to play. I know this is not a surprise to anybody, but one thing I've never done is pay full price for any pack ever in Summoner's War. I make it a point to buy the packs that are the best value and then to make sure I get the biggest discounts possible on those packs, and that's what Huawei's App Gallery allows you to do. Through our partnership this month, you can actually get 20% discount on every single pack you buy. The way it works is that you buy a pack, let's say it's 100 euros, you get cashback points equal to 20%, which is 20 euros back, that can be applied to your next purchase. On top of that, you can redeem up to 2 coupons every single day. These coupons can be worth as much as 24 euros on a 100 euro pack. The savings really add up, guys. There's no reason to be paying full price. Now, I don't want to... Okay, so next up, we are going to be taking a look at the options section. So, we're going to start just straight from the top, use locked runes. Now, I touched on this a little bit in the monsters part 3, which is if you come over to the monster tab and you see these little locks that are right next to the monsters, you actually have the ability to lock and unlock any individual monster. In addition, you also can lock individual runes, so maybe I just don't ever want to use this slot 1 energy for some reason. So when you're on the optimization tab, you have the choice to use locked runes or not use locked runes. Right below it, and an extension of that feature, pretty self-explanatory, ignore locked runes even if equipped on this monster. So a lot of times if I'm runing a monster that I'm not super enthusiastic about, then I may only build it from inventory, but if I'm re-runing like on an FRR, a really important monster, then I may use locked runes. And if it's a monster that's in between, it's not my most important monster, but it's one that I'll use on a regular basis, then I may leave both of these unchecked. And the effect of this is that it will check for runes from monsters that are not locked, but it will not pull runes from monsters that are locked. Now, as an extension of that, if you use that system, which I highly recommend, you're going to want to make sure that you lock the monsters that are most important to you. So typically speaking, you would want to make sure that you lock, for example, all of your dungeon monsters, because you don't want to be pulling runes from dungeon teams. You would also want to make sure that you lock the runes from your siege defenses, for example. So I keep probably 50 or 60 monsters locked, and one of the big benefits of that is those 60 locked monsters, that pulls 300 runes out of the pool when the optimizer is running its searches, which again, everything is exponential. So when I have all of those runes that are not being included, it makes the searches faster, whether it's on Pro, Free, or Swap Connect. Now, below that, we have use only runes from storage monsters. This is actually literally talking about in-game storage. I feel like this is kind of just a throwback feature, maybe to older versions of Summoner's War itself. Below that, we have max plus 12 for slots 1, 3, 5. So what this is talking about is when it estimates, for example, let's say I say that I want a minimum of 1800 attack total on my Ganymede. I told it I wanted 1800 attack. So down here, it shows me 1802 and 1831 attack in these two builds. Now, I do not currently have this max plus 12 checked. So what that means is that it is assuming that I took my plus 1 and I brought it up to 15. I powered it up to 15. If I were to check this, then it would assume that I'm only going to power it up to 12. Below that, we have options to display results with arena towers, with Guild War flags, and then also with your guild skills. All three of these are actually going to show you like the real stats. So where you're going to use these is in particular, you're going to use the arena towers and the guild skills when you're building your dungeon teams. These are really useful, for example, when building your Trikaru team, and you need to see if you're going to have 3,300 effective defense, because it will take into consideration, maybe you have a level 11 or 12 defense tower, so it takes into consideration that. The Guild War flags, where you're going to use this mostly, has to do with damage calculations, which we're going to be covering in the next video. When you're trying to hit a specific damage threshold for a cleave or a nuke monster, a snipe monster, something like that. For example, copper, maybe I want to make sure my copper hits for at least 55,000. Now, ignore runes and higher priority monsters. That comes from this priority tab over here. Actually, just realized I probably should have covered this in an earlier video, but the way we're set up, this is probably going to be covered in the 6th or 7th video of the series. But just know that the priority tab is here. You can build a priority list, and then if you do build that priority list, let's say you have a monster who's number 26 on your priority list. By checking this option, it will ignore the runes from the 25 monsters above him or her. Now, this last feature right here is actually an extremely useful one, which says force these runes to be included in builds, and then below that it has fields for include and exclude monsters. So let's say that I do not want to take any runes from my Ciara. Maybe my Ciara is not locked because normally I don't care, but for this one particular build I don't want to take runes from her. So I would exclude the Ciara. But now let's say my Bastet is locked, but I've decided that I want to build my Ganny faster than Bastet, so maybe I will include my Bastet. Now, also in these fields, you can include individual runes, and that's actually pretty cool. So sometimes I might be building a monster that I don't think is like that important, and I don't want to give that monster any of my most OP runes, but I don't want to lock those runes because, I run a lot of builds in the optimizer. So let's say I just ran a build and it popped up this crit damage rune. It's in my inventory, but it's got 28 speed, and I don't think that's good enough for Ganymede, for example. So in that case, I would actually come over here, I would look at the rune ID number, which is 403. So I would come up here and I would say exclude rune 403 from the builds, and that is rune 1183. So maybe I've decided that that rune should definitely go on my Ganny. Like, I just think that Ganny should have rune 1183. So I can actually force include that rune by doing that. Or I can just not check the force include, but include it and make sure that it's included in the optimization possibilities that are run. Now, the next section down here is focus stats. This is something that, generally speaking, if you're on SWOP Pro or SWOP Connect, you're going to want to leave all of this blank. By leaving this blank, you're basically telling it to run every single possible build that meets the criteria that you set up here between sets and options. So you're just telling it to check for every possible rune. That's the value of SWOP Pro and SWOP Connect. If you're on the free version, then you actually want to narrow down the number of options that it's running so that it doesn't take so long to process everything. We're going to look at the stats that we just put in, and we're going to say HP needs to be a focus because that's one of the stats we're looking for. Speed needs to be a focus. And if you guys see down below me where it says estimated builds, as soon as I hit accuracy, as soon as I type in the numbers here, those estimated builds are changing. So I hit crit rate, estimated builds goes up or down, and that's because when I tell it to focus on these stats, it's actually prioritizing runes that have more or less of these stats. You'll also notice when you enter in a stat in the focus, down here a little slider pops up. This will just adjust it so that it looks at different runes. Again, as we go through the focus and the search depth, what we're trying to do is make it look at fewer runes and then make a build out of the runes that have the best chance to make that build. Now, as far as search depth goes, this number will determine basically how many runes it's going to look at. So you see the number just changed to 900,000 when I put in a search depth of 10. If I go to 20, the number goes up to 44 million, guys. Remember, everything is exponential in SWOP. So there is no magic number that I can give you and tell you it's perfect for search depth, because it's going to depend on the speed of your computer. It's going to depend on how many runes you have on your account. It's going to depend on which of these above options that you set. But from my own personal experience using SWOP Pro for, using SWOP Free for over 2 years before Pro came out, typically speaking, I ran most builds with a number between 10 and 60. So 10 was the lowest I would run, and 60 was the highest I would run. The 60 builds often could take me 5 or 10 minutes for it to run. So you're going to want to play around with the search depth and find what number is comfortable for you and how long you're okay waiting for it. It's going to be a different number for everybody. Now, artifacts we're going to be covering in a different video, so we're going to jump over it for right now. Okay, so now that we've configured all of our settings up here, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to turn on this filter threshold right here, and you guys will see that it says the system is new. It's been saying it's new for like 5 years now. It's been around for a while. I do recommend using the filter threshold. I've never had a problem with it, but I imagine if somebody does have a problem, if your optimizer is crashing, then turn it off. So you're going to turn that on, and then from there, you're going to go ahead and just set up all of the different stats that you want. Now you see there was a clear button up here, which I just used. So for this build, let's just say that we want 30,000 HP, and we want an effective HP of 150,000. And we want 50 accuracy. Let's say those are the only 3 things that we want. Then we can actually just go ahead and hit optimize. We're ready to. Now, if you're in the Pro version or on SWOP Connect, you want to make sure that GPU optimization is checkmarked. If you're on the free version, this option won't be there. Same thing, if you're on the free version, the get builds after canceling option won't be there. I think those are actually the only 2 options that are different in the free version from the paid version. And then all of these across the top, as we look at our sets down on the bottom, all of these are sortable options. So if I wanted to see my highest effective HP, which I just did, I just click right here on the top. If I want to see my lowest effective HP, I can sort it again. So now that I want to get fewer builds, I change these 2 numbers in right here, and then I can re-optimize, and you'll see that we're not finding that overwhelming number of builds again, which is going to make it much easier. Now we've only got 38 builds. That makes it much easier for me to find my final build. And then one other feature I didn't mention is you'll see these 3 tabs on the right. You actually want to check these before you run the optimizer. This is just going to say, do you want the actual stats of the rune? Do you want to assume that you put all the runes to +12? Or do you want to assume that you put all the runes to +15? Now, if we look over to the left, you see all these rune numbers, and then basically the first 6 numbers over here, these are the rune ID numbers. The last 2 numbers on the right, those are the artifact numbers. When I highlight it, it brings up a little chart. Now, for me, this is really useful. If I'm taking runes from monsters, I try to find the best build I can that's not taking runes from too many monsters. Like, maybe I've got 5 builds that are about equal, but one of the builds is taking 3 runes from my Clara, and then the other 3 come from inventory. And the next build is taking 1 rune from Aquila, 1 rune from Clara, 1 rune from Hyenes, and 3 from inventory. I want the one that only breaks Clara, so I only have to fix 1 monster after. And then I will also, if I know, for example, like we mentioned earlier, rune 403. If I know 403 is an amazing rune, I might take a look at my rune IDs and make sure I'm not using rune 403, something like that. And then from there, I will look at the chart. I'll decide what stats are most important to me. So for a Swift Ganymede, I will sort by speed. And I'll see my top couple of builds are both 268. My next couple are 265. Then I've got one at 264, and then a whole bunch dropping off at 263. So if I want to narrow down my builds really quickly, I can cut them off at 265 speed. And once I type this number in, I do not actually have to re-optimize. I can simply hit apply, and cuts my chart way down. Now, when I look at the remaining builds, I can see I have some that are over 40k HP and some that are in the 38k range. So maybe I just want to see the builds that are over 40,000 HP, so I do that to narrow it down. You can do the same thing with any stat. Crit rate, accuracy, resistance, you can change any of the numbers in the filters, even if it's a number that maybe you didn't load in on the initial search. So maybe I put 51 crit damage, it's a brand new filter, it'll still narrow things off for me. So we do want to have a couple of builds down here, and then the last function I'm going to show you guys in this chart is this little pin right here. If you click the pin, it will save the build for you. So we're going to save these two builds. By the way, guys, I just realized I did forget to show one more feature in the filter section. This little more button just opens 2 extra fields. It allows you to filter by efficiency, and then EHPD is your effective HP when you've been defense broken. Okay, so that covers our filters. Now, we've pinned our 2 builds. Now, let's say I want to compare those 2 builds to my options in violence. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just come down here and I'm going to lower a couple of these filters. I'm going to go ahead and re-optimize in violent. We're going to see if we come up with any builds. And we came up with 2 builds with our new filters. So we can pin these 2 builds as well, and that allows us to compare our swift and our violent runes and builds together. Now if I look at these builds over here, I can see one build standing out at 98% efficiency. Efficiency is definitely not the thing that really matters that much with Ganymede, but efficiency is a good measure of how many stats are in his build. And then when I look at this 98 efficiency and I throw in that it has 39 resistance, which I don't care about at all, it tells me already that this build is going to have fewer stats. So we're going to drop that out. That leaves us with 3 builds. Now, the last thing I can do, if I can't decide between these 3 builds, is I can come up here and I can rerun those builds fully simulated. So that will show me if some of these builds are not grinded yet. And when I run just my pinned builds, they're the first things that calculate, so I don't actually have to run the whole optimizer. I can hit start and stop right away, and it will reconfigure these builds. And as you can see, my swift builds got super faster. As soon as I hit that on the simulate, they went up to 274 and 275. They gained like 10 speed each. And then you will also see that the efficiency numbers didn't change. So when you simulate gems and grinds, it actually doesn't show you what the new efficiency will be. So keep in mind that once I simulated some of these builds, all of these builds are higher efficiency because it's simulating gems and grinds, but some of them may have gained more efficiency than others. But what we're really trying to do right now is compare the stats. So from here, my process would be simply to look at the 3 builds. I would start by looking at the 2 swift builds. And I would say, you know what, effective HP is about the same, accuracy is about the same, so the attack is about the same, but the top one has a much higher crit rate, and it's only 1 speed slower. I'd rather have the higher crit rate. So I narrow it down to 1 swift and 1 violent build, then I pick between these 2 builds. If I completely can't decide, I can actually click on the blue hyperlinks over here, and I can look at this build, and I can check each rune individually in my mind, figure out, can I make one build better than the other? Actually, if I look at all of these runes, I see that the only option I have would be maybe to gem this accuracy into attack percent on the slot 6, which would give me slightly more stats, but it would actually make my accuracy pretty low for a Ganymede, so it's not something I'd want to do. So I'm going to say that this build is about as good as it can get. And then I would do the same thing with the other one, pick between the 2, and once I've ultimately picked whichever build, let's say I decide to go with the violent build, once I've picked my final build, I click on the build, it brings me over to this tab right here, and it shows me exactly which 6 runes I'm going to have. Then I'll go ahead and put these runes on my Ganny, and there's a couple of things I always do. Before I apply the build, I make sure that the accuracy, the resistance, and the crit rate match up, and the crit damage. Why those 4? Because those 4 are not grindable, and just in case I ran my build with simulated stats, I want to make sure I used all the right runes. That's a good way to double check, make sure I didn't screw anything up. Now, for the optimizer purposes, from there, you have the ability to equip runes or equip runes and artifacts as run by the build. And then you also have the ability to go ahead and lock your runes or lock your runes and artifacts as run by the build, and that's just come, if you actually click the main button, it's equip runes and artifacts, or lock runes and artifacts. If you click this little pull down arrow, you have the option to choose between. If we scroll down, by the way, you'll see the artifacts that were chosen. But again, for most builds, I'm usually going to recommend that you run the optimizer without the artifacts, just so that you can run a deeper range of builds instead. This damage options tab, this one is very important. We're going to be covering this in part 5 of the series, which is how to calculate damage. And basically, that's going to be finding your advanced builds. Okay, guys, so that's pretty much it. Just one last thing. Special request to you guys. If you're watching the video to this point, that probably means that you found some value in it. I'm asking you, for those of you who enjoyed the content, please smash that like button. Please drop a comment for the YouTube algorithm. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It's the support that motivates me to continue creating content, so I'm asking you guys, just show me that you're enjoying the content. Maybe turn the bell notifications on. It's very much appreciated, guys. Seriously, thank you to all of those of you who are already subscribed. Thank you guys very much for supporting the channel throughout this time. And on that note, guys, that's it. Hope you enjoyed today's video, and we'll see you in the next one. Hey, it is Xennial. Oh, no, wait, this is the outro. My bad. Hey guys, if you want to see more content, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications. It's your support that makes me want to create continuing content. I thank you guys for the support, as always, and we'll see you in the next video.